Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Anna Yu, and I'm the lead organizer for TEDxShakerHS.
And my name is Harry Fazone, and I am the co-organizer for TEDxSHS. We're very excited to welcome you all to our third annual TEDxSHS event. Tonight we have 6 very thought-provoking speeches from 6 incredible speakers, and we would like to thank those speakers for their incredible flexibility this year, navigating a very unique year.
And this year, for the first time, we decided to choose a theme for our event. Called Waking Up, our aim with this theme was to capture the various circumstances facing not only the world, but young people. The calls for social justice rising across the country, the pandemic impacting the world, and ultimately our generation coming to terms with new realizations about ourselves and the world as we progress through our youth. Whether it's the injustices in our communities, waking up to the value of human connections and the value of our voices, or waking up to anything else that we learn about ourselves during these times of isolation, the students of Shaker High School have started to wake up in their own unique ways. And so, the moment we've all been waiting for, we'll pass it on to our speakers. First up, we have Nazhlah Thompson, who is in 11th grade, and she will be starting with her speech, #Slacktivism.
Generation Z, whose members were born from 1997 to 2012, are acclaimed by people of all ages for standing up in what they believe in and sparking change in the world, specifically through the power of the internet. But is that the truth? Can teenagers really demolish the issues in today's society through TikTok videos and Instagram stories? Many people devotedly agree, but dare I say that they simply cannot. The truth is that the majority of today's teenagers' activism is inherently performative and simply accomplishes nothing of substance. It leaves the activists feeling proud and morally fulfilled, but at the end of the day, the problems still remain, lurking underneath dozens of meaningless Change.org petitions and Twitter threads crafted by ill-educated teenagers. June 2nd of 2020, 8 days after the murder of George Floyd, was declared Blackout Tuesday by Instagram users worldwide. Millions of people, celebrities included, posted pictures of black squares under #Blackout Tuesday. It was designed to be a moment of silence for victims of race-based police brutality and to show selfless support for the Black Lives Matter movement, which had just taken the world by storm. It was a heartwarming idea in theory, but in reality it did more harm than it did good. What does a plain black picture on your feed do to help the issue at hand? Actually useful posts containing GoFundMes for families of victims of police brutality and bail funds for those who were arrested at protests were silenced by a daunting sea of pitch black. Those who were supposedly benefiting from the teenagers' activism were truly being stifled by an abundance of greed, dismissiveness, and ignorance. The same scenario can be seen throughout regular uploads by these young activists. Clicking through Instagram stories, I frequently see graphic designs saying, "Black Lives Matter," or tweet from some random person saying, "We need change now." Okay, so then what? What comes next? What is a few empty words or a little drawing going to do for the issue at hand? On the more extreme end, privileged white kids who get their news from TikTok are turning this into their own dystopian movie. They dream of living like Katniss Everdeen and preach, starting a revolution. I can't count how many times I've seen white girls scramble to post sparkly pink aesthetic posts on their Instagram or Visco account that say, "Hello Kitty says ACAB, and my melody says punch racists," and then vaguely mention Black Lives Matter like it's a chore, like they're forced to for the sake of their reputation. I find that teenagers, left-leaning teenagers specifically, tend to idolize the politicians within their party to the point of treating them like they would their favorite actor or singer. Yes, these politicians may have positively contributed to the state of our country and helped to push an agenda that these teenagers wholeheartedly agree with, but idolizing them simply crosses the line. Politics is notoriously filled with disgusting corruption, and the politicians at hand are in no way excluding from it. Idolizing these politicians further feeds into the performative nature of Gen Z's activism. It's like they're mocking those that their activism is supposedly helping and blatantly expressing that they care more about personal gain than helping others. One thing that's truly stuck with me, living as a teenager in the age of the internet, was a TikTok video that was posted soon after Joe Biden was announced as president-elect. Mindlessly scrolling through my For You page, I came across a sparkly fan cam of Kamala Harris to the song No by Meghan Trainor. "Listen up, we stand our vice president to be," read the caption, with a heart and a sparkle emoji at the end. The video received 2.8 million likes. Now, I don't expect 16-year-olds to be going to federal courts in an attempt to make substantial political progress. That's just ridiculous. But what truly has been done as a result of social media-based activism? Black Lives Matter was painted on a street in some city. People are putting BLM in their Instagram bio. Sure, that's a great start, but people are acting like that means it's okay to call it a day and that all the issues are therefore solved. What my generation is doing is blatantly not enough. If we continue down this path of turning a blind eye once done with the bare minimum, the pain for some will never end. More and more will struggle beneath the shadows until too many are, and society deteriorates from the weight of the pain we ignored. Now, when you think of Generation Z activists who brought upon apparent change, who do you think of? Malala, who spoke out about the importance of girls' education after the Taliban took control of her town and continued to raise money for her cause after she was shot in the head? Or maybe you think of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish environmentalist who went from protesting outside the Swedish parliament for more action on climate change and organizing student strikes to speaking at the UN Climate Action Summit and becoming the youngest Time Person of the Year? Or another person that comes to mind might be Emma Gonzalez, a survivor from the 2018 Stoneman Douglas shooting who gave powerful speeches advocating for more gun control and helped to organize the widely successful March for Our Lives. But I can guarantee that you do not think of your classmate who posts screenshots of random tweets on their Instagram story. Well, what can we do? For starters, detaching activism from solely being executed on Instagram and Twitter is essential to bring about change. Yes, these websites may be incredibly effective tools in this journey, but can real-world issues truly be solved through a screen? Donating your time by volunteering or organizing and attending protests, writing letters or calling state and local officials, and simply educating others without a poorly drawn graphic design can do wonders for the issues that we hold so dearly in our hearts. If we all take steps towards genuine activism like the young and prominent women I mentioned, think about how much we could change the wrongdoing in our world. Police brutality is still incredibly apparent all around this country. Homophobia and transphobia continues to rage through our communities. Black people are still being killed, and not enough people are talking about it. Tell me, where are these young and aspiring activists now?
Next up, we have Prapti Patel. She is in 11th grade, and her speech is titled Solidarity Between Two Communities.
Hello, everybody. Racism in this country has been largely a binary issue, and in the past has been mostly between white Americans and black Americans. But in the 20th and 21st century, there's been a wave of immigration to the country, and it's kind of created the US to be a melting pot, and specifically Asian Americans. Asian Americans and black Americans both face racism in this country, and do in the present day. But Asian Americans have this privilege, and this privilege kind of started in the system of immigration. But Asian Americans use this privilege to kind of hide and detach themselves from the racism in this country. And instead of the detachment, Asian Americans should use the privilege and acknowledge the roots of it to unify with the black community and fight against oppression. Black Americans have faced racism in the country through the past and in the present. In the past, obviously, with slavery, Black Americans have faced so much discrimination. And after slavery, in the 1960s and 1970s, it was really hard for Black Americans to get jobs. People were discriminating them. And this kind of caused generations of poverty. And in these poverty-filled neighborhoods, there's really bad school systems that don't prioritize education. They don't prioritize rigorous classes. They don't prioritize college. They say, we're just trying to make you not be a criminal. You know, they're not set up for success like we are here. And there's statistics to show that Caucasians and Asian Americans go to way better schools than African Americans, just setting them up for failure. And then, you know, more recently, cops. There's been so much exposure to the racism that cops have against African Americans. Statistics also prove that Black Americans are more likely to die when encountering a cop in basic arrests. You know, just like a traffic stop, nobody should die. But there is statistics to prove that. Asian Americans have also faced racism in this country. With World War II, the Japanese were called the undesirable race. They were alienized. They were excluded. Then more recently with 9/11, brown people, just all brown people, were looked at as terrorists, and people were afraid and hated people that were brown. And obviously, I'm brown myself, and my family, we're a brown family. And I noticed that when we would go to airports, it was very obvious that my dad was stopped more than anybody else, and he was always checked in these random searches, but they weren't so random. So there's been tons and tons of racism. And then obviously today with COVID-19, there's been so much racism against Asian Americans, specifically Chinese Americans. There's been hateful acts, hateful terms thrown around by politicians in this country. So there's been tons and tons of hate. But though there is this racism, there's also this privilege that Asian Americans have. This privilege kind of started in the system of immigration. So Asian immigrants, a lot of them came to this country through, a work visa or through school or through family relations, because it's not easy to immigrate to the US. It's actually very hard. So the immigrants that were coming here were, of a little bit of higher quality. They came here to work. They came here through IT, engineering, medical. So they came here for a reason. And they came here with big families. And obviously, if you can send your child across the world, you must be from a family that values education, that has good values, or obviously is somewhat wealthy. It's not, the plane tickets to come here are not cheap. So the immigrants that were coming here were hardworking, and there was kind of a good quality of them. And then with the Immigration and Naturalization Acts in 1965, this act only attracted skilled laborers to the US, and it was used by politicians in opposition of the civil rights movement. And politicians used this to say to African Americans, look at these Asian immigrants that are coming, that are, skilled, and look how successful they are. But this wasn't entirely true, because the group of immigrants that was coming is not the whole. It was obviously good quality of immigrants that were coming. So this privilege kind of started building. Americans put Asians on kind of a pedestal and were like, hey, look, they're kind of successful. They respected them because of what they were doing. But this privilege is rooted in the racism. It's kind of saying that you guys are both minorities, but look, you guys are better, maybe. You guys are doing better, but that's not necessarily true. So this privilege, Asian Americans kind of used it, and they hid, and they decided, okay, I'm just going to, ignore the racism, and I'm going to use this privilege and kind of ignore the problems in this country. So it caused this detachment between the two communities. My parents, they immigrated to this country. They were both 19 and 20 when they immigrated. And my dad, he came here and he lived with his huge family. He came and stayed with his uncle and his 5 sisters. So he had a great support system. And then my mom later moved, through marriage. So they came here and they had support and a family. And when immigrants come to this country, America, is seen as the land of opportunity, and it's seen as kind of a lotto ticket if you get to come. So often immigrants, and specifically Asian immigrants, are kind of blinded to the problems in this country. They don't even want to look at them because they kind of see like all the goods. And how can you look at the bad? You kind of ignore it if there's so much good. So that was really common in a lot of Asian immigrants. But then more recently with George Floyd, it kind of became hard to ignore what was happening in this country. It was all over the news. So George Floyd was a man that was killed over a counterfeit $20 bill, I believe, and he was murdered, and his arrest was taken to the extreme, and he repeatedly said, I can't breathe, but he was killed. And this caused outrage throughout the country. In all 50 states, 60 countries, and all 7 continents, there were protests fighting for Black Lives Matter. The death of George Floyd brought the deaths of Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Philando Castile, Breonna Taylor, and so many more to light. And Asian Americans saw this, but most of them felt, like this was inapplicable to them. And they felt like they couldn't relate to it, because Asian Americans aren't necessarily afraid of talking to the cops because they're Asian. Obviously no one loves talking to the cops, but it wasn't because of their race. So they felt like they couldn't relate to this. But throughout the year, I feel like more Asian Americans kind of woke up to their privilege. Asian Americans are called the model minority, and I learned through social media that this term model minority is not a good term. It's kind of saying, hey, you're the model, but you're still a minority, So it's kind of saying that you're not equal. We don't see you as equal, but you're okay, I guess. And so that's not a good thing. And I think a lot of Asian Americans realize this. And through platforms like Instagram and Twitter, I saw so much and I learned so much through resources that influencers were posting, like donation sites, numbers to call, petitions to sign. There was so much exposure to this, specifically this year. And my parents learned a lot, and they decided that it's time to stand up and it's time to accept what's going on in this country and no more being blinded. So my parents decided to go to a protest. They attended one with me, and they decided that it's time to not be silent. It's time to make change. And many Asian Americans realize this, but many need to still realize this. And as Kamala Harris said, she said, "Our unity is our strength and our diversity is our power." And this really resonates with the marginalized communities in America. We need to unify and fight against change instead of kind of using maybe our differences to separate, because our differences make us stronger. So Asian Americans need to stop being silent and using their privilege to kind of hide away. They need to recognize the roots of their privilege and fight with the Black community against oppression and fight for change. Thank you.
And next, we have Soha Khan, who is in 9th grade, and her speech is entitled Society's Success versus My Success.
What's the definition of success? Let me reword this. What is society's definition of success? Society's definition of success is if you've earned wealth or gained respect, you found success. And there are adults and teenagers chasing this success. I think success is when you achieve or earn something happily. I came to this conclusion when I asked my friends and family a question. What do you want to be when you grow up? Some said they wanted to be teachers, artists, fashion designers. Some said they wanted to be engineers, lawyers. I noticed something. My younger cousins didn't care about how much money they would make or how famous they'd be. They innocently just told me what they wanted to be. My friends that are my age and older, they said careers that make a lot of money or like earn a respect. And after this, I came to a conclusion that my perspective on success is when you achieve or earn something happily. What do you want to be when you grow up? I think this is a really important question, and I've been asked it ever since I was little. When I was 9 or 10 years old, that's when I knew what I wanted to be, and this career would bring me true happiness. My dad had told me stories about my grandpa. He had cancer. And he was very cautious about these things. Like, if something was wrong, he would right away go to the doctors. Unfortunately, it started off as coughing. It started getting worse, and he went to the doctors. They did a CT scan, and everything was fine. That's when they decided to check inside. When they checked inside, there were cancer cells just everywhere. There were so many you couldn't cut them off. Now remember, the technology we have right now wasn't here 16 years ago. So after a few months, he unfortunately passed away. This inspired me to become a doctor. This career is truly going to bring me happiness because at the end, I'll find my success. I am a freshman in high school, and there are juniors and seniors choosing their colleges. And the first thing they may look at is the salary, the amount of money they'll make, rather than thinking, will I be happy with this career in 35 years? I am only 15 years old, and what do I know about success? So let me give you a family example. Ever since my dad was younger, his dream was to start a business. So after college, he decided to start a business. He decided to start a medical supply business. It was a business which would supply pharmacies. After going through lots of paperwork and locations, he found the perfect store. And then it was time for advertising. and he made business cards, and after about a year, the business was a success. Now, you may think the business was a success because he got lots of buyers and he was earning money. But no, it was a success because he had finally achieved his dream. My dad took the right path to success, and he achieved his dream happily. I am a freshman who wants to go to college in the future, and society has put a definition on this too. Society's perspective is if you go to an Ivy League school, if you go to Harvard, if you go to Yale, you'll definitely be successful in the future. But no, you can go to a community college and still be successful as long as you find your purpose at the end. And society has put this message into our brains. Good school equals success. But you can still go to a community college and find your success. So let me give you an example. Let's say you want to be an accountant. You can go to Siena College and become an accountant. You don't have to go to Harvard to become a successful accountant. As long as you find your purpose at the end, you know you've found your success. I am only 15 years old, and what do I know about the adult world? All I know is that I want to find my happiness and find success. And I'll do that by becoming a doctor. I'll use my knowledge and skills by helping people. I hope you find your success and the end result is happiness.
Next up, we have Sophie Dvorak. She is in 12th grade, and her speech is titled Statistics, Sentiments, and Songs, What Spotify Gets Wrong About Your Music and About You.
Statistics, sentiments, and songs. What Spotify gets wrong about your music and about you. 1,547,459,243 milliseconds is only 18 days. Slightly more than 2 weeks, but not quite 3. About 60% of a month, but less than 5% of a year. About 0.28% of my life so far, although it feels more significant than a statistical sliver of seconds. This 1.5 billion milliseconds is the exact amount of time that I spent listening to music last year, made up of almost 18,000 individual plays of over 3,500 individual songs. Now, for Spotify users, this information isn't anything new or exciting. Most of us are familiar with our Spotify Wrapped, the neatly organized screen of information that the music streaming service provides every December to tell its users statistics like their top song and artist for the past year. Spotify is great at putting together an Instagrammable page of information, and even creates unique playlists to cater to each individual's special tastes. What you might not be familiar with, however, is how detailed Spotify actually gets with its information. At any point in the year, you can request a complete list of your streaming history, including every song you've listened to in the past 12 months, your complete search history, and how much time you spent listening to each song, all time-stamped down to the millisecond. What's more, Spotify has an algorithm that assigns a score from 0 to 1 to each song, measuring characteristics like energy, danceability, and happiness. Recently, I requested, downloaded, and graphed my own Spotify listening history. I was especially interested in the happiness score. Would I see that I listened to the happiest songs in the summer, or maybe the saddest songs on Monday morning? I was hoping to see specific songs that clearly corresponded to specific moments in my life. What sort of narrative arc of music would I find? Well, as it turns out, none at all. As you can see from this graph, my average happiness of songs over time is pretty random, and there's no clear pattern that seemed to drive my listening habits. I just listened to what I wanted to, when I wanted to. But as I took a closer look, I began to notice something beyond the lack of patterns. There were some pretty clear discrepancies between Spotify's algorithm score and what I thought a song's happiness score should be. Those of you who know me know that I am a huge musical theater fan. So, naturally, my first instinct was to see if Spotify could recognize the stories behind my favorite shows. No musical theater song stands alone. Each is part of a larger, overarching story. Could Spotify recognize that story? Let's take a look at an example. The horror movie turned musical Beetlejuice is chock full of upbeat and rhythmic songs that hold together a story about demons, ghosts, and revenge. Let's take a listen to one song from the end of Beetlejuice, entitled What I Know Now.
That's what I know.
So, after listening to that song, we can gather some pretty key information. We hear that it's up-tempo and very rhythmic. We hear strong vocal energy with lots of people dancing. And the upbeat drums make us want to tap our toes. So, overall, after this one listen, we're thinking that the song seems pretty happy, right? Well, Spotify agrees. Spotify assigned this song a happiness score of 0.813 out of 1. Pretty high. And after our own listen, we think that we agree with that. But let's take a closer look, and we'll find that things aren't exactly as they seem. Why don't we try listening to this song again? This time, reading the lyrics as we listen.
That's what I know.
These lyrics are quite a bit darker than the melody that they're paired with. And when we listen to the song in this new context, we hear it a bit differently. The strong vocal line doesn't sound upbeat or energetic anymore. It's mournful, regretful, almost desperate. It's interesting that Spotify couldn't pick up on that overarching story, even though that story is what gives this song its meaning. But maybe lyrics are too hard, so let's take a look at another example, this time an instrumental one. Ramin Djawadi's song, I Need You by My Side, from the Game of Thrones soundtrack has a very low happiness score of 0.038. Let's take a listen. This song definitely seems to exude sadness, with its minor chord progression, soft instrumental choices, and slow rhythmic patterns. But what about the memories that I have associated with it? What about how I felt watching two of my favorite characters reach a mutual understanding, and how that unity inspired me? As a listener, I find this song to be brimming with promise. Yet at the same time, I understand that not everyone will feel that way. Someone who isn't familiar with these characters, or who sees them in a different way, will have a different interpretation of this song. And just as it's important to understand every song in the context in which it's performed, it's also important to understand that everyone will see that context a little differently, and have a bit of a different perspective on it. As I pondered the disconnect between Spotify's algorithm and my own emotional experience, I realized that I too used to assign simple labels based on casual observations and snap judgments. Perhaps this was my desire to organize and make sense of the increasingly complicated world of high school. But what I failed to recognize is that everyone else was also trying to discover who they wanted to be. The truth is, it's easy to make these snap judgments. It's easy for me to assign someone a role in my life based on one side of them that I see after one quick scan or experience. Spotify's algorithm might not be sentient, but it's not alone. How many times have you taken something at face value, resisting any deeper analysis for the sake of your own convenient narrative? How many times have you been frustrated that someone doesn't understand your perspective, but you're not trying to understand theirs? With open-mindedness, we have to make an effort to take this extra step. We have to make that effort to listen to the song again, to see each other's experiences again, and to understand the context in which everyone makes their own decisions. There's a piece of writing that I love, David Foster Wallace's "This is Water" speech, that says that we have a choice about how we see others. The people in our lives are more than just supporting characters in our stories, and we have to make an effort to accept each other's depth and complexity. When I was younger, I looked at someone's actions in the context of my own story, my friend's bad mood or my mom's forgetfulness. But as I grew up, I learned to understand that everyone has their own context, everyone has their own story. My friend's bad day or my mom's deadline. If we make the effort to be open-minded and see each other's actions in the context of their own stories, we can be more than just an algorithm. A lot of people wonder whether artificial intelligence will ever be able to replace human artists. And I believe that the answer is no. Spotify's algorithm can tell us a lot, but despite the tens of thousands of data points, it's barely scratching the surface. An algorithm can recognize tempo, key, rhythm, but it can't recognize meaning. And meaning is what gives music its power. Meaning is the emotional value of a song. The memory of dancing to a song at homecoming with all your friends, or watching your favorite character on screen, or sitting in the audience of a Broadway show exhilarated by the energy around you. An algorithm can't understand that, and its label is inaccurate because of it. Thousands of data points later, I've understood that the emotional value of a song cannot be defined by a single label or a snap judgment. To be more than just an algorithm, we need to make an effort to accept the stories of those around us. We need to create space for those stories, and we need to listen to them in their full context. In an era that's so often driven by division, it's so easy for us to write someone off after being a glance. Why is it that it is so easy for differences of opinion, of lifestyle, of belief, to so quickly spiral from civil conversation to deep division? I believe that the answer lies in the snap judgment. With open-mindedness, empathy, and respect, we need to take the time to make that extra effort, to take that extra step, and to hear each other's stories. We're all songs in this proverbial playlist, and I want to listen to each one beyond its tempo, rhythm, and key, striving to hear the full story. Thank you.
And next, we have Izzy Cowan, who is in 12th grade, and her speech is entitled, "The Value of Not Waking Up."
If you were to ask me a few months back to describe how my life was going in one quote from musical theater, as an avid fan of the theater arts, I could probably spit out dozens of inspirational quotes like, "Even the darkest night will end, and the sun will rise," Les Mis, or, "When you're broken on the ground, you will be found," dear Evan Hansen. But it would ultimately come down to one quote that I feel is the true representation of my experiences as a high school senior in December. It's all college applications and Doctor Who quotations. Mean Girls, the musical. Now, despite the fact that I've never once watched Doctor Who in my life, I could replace that name with any fandom that has helped me through some difficult periods. But as relatable as this quote from Mean Girls is, it's actually used to describe the most unrelatable group in all of North Shore High. The tragically, socially cursed mathletes. In fact, if we finish the quote that I cited earlier, it reads, "It's all college applications and Doctor Who quotations. They wear their awkwardness with stubborn pride." Why do we always assume that the geeks of our society have no social or real-world skills? Now, I recognize that Mean Girls is the epitome of stereotypes, and that every living soul at North Shore High is a perfectly molded archetype. But this pattern has been going on since the dawn of modern media for teens, whether that be in literature, in movies, in musicals, or on Disney Channel. I love early 2000s and 2010s Disney Channel and the blissful nostalgia that it brings me. But as I was watching the Disney Channel original movie Geek Charming a few months back for the first time in about 4 years, it dawned on me that the pop culture textbook definition of a nerd was once again being force-fed to me. In the movie, a sci-fi film superfan is confined to the miserable corner of the lunchroom with a group of social outcasts until he decides to make a movie about the school's popular girl. Suddenly, lo and behold, as if she were his angelic savior, he seems socially capable and several times more confident. But real-world nerds are the true saviors. They are the creators of the things we couldn't even imagine living without today. Martin Cooper, who oversaw the production of the first mobile phone in the 1970s, has credited the Star Trek communicator with inspiring his life-altering invention. Simon Lake was inspired by the work of Jules Verne in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to create his own submarine, the Argonaut. Where would these groundbreaking inventors be without the works of fiction that created a spark in them? Where would they be without their sense that the impossible is possible? Where would they be without their sense of unreality? Without their sense their imaginations are the source of what eventually becomes reality? Where would they be if they weren't so caught up in fictional delusions of what doesn't yet exist? Now, I digress, and I understand that not all those who immerse themselves in fiction are going to become trailblazing inventors. But there is another fallacy that needs to be addressed besides that of the incompetent nerd. And that is the assumption that those who indulge in fiction are escaping their real-world problems, choosing to live in fantasy rather than ground themselves in reality. But what if we could use fiction and self-projection onto fictional characters to face our most difficult challenges head-on, and with more strength and bravery than we could possibly muster on our own? We can learn so much about ourselves through the intimate observation we get to do of fictional characters. I've been lucky enough to witness this firsthand. I've been struggling with anxiety and panic disorder stemming from perfectionism and imposter syndrome since the beginning of 10th grade. Imposter syndrome involves the inability of a person to recognize their own accomplishments, but at the same time, the belief that their accomplishments are what determine their worth, and that life will fall apart if they don't continue to perform optimally all the time. This type of thinking, if left untreated, can lead to depression and burnout, both of which I still struggle with on a day-to-day basis. But I'm learning to cope, and one unexpected individual is helping me to do just that. Around August of this past year, in the midst of a global pandemic and a severe mental trough, I discovered Detroit Become Human, a story-driven, choose-your-own-adventure video game that is set in a futuristic world where androids accompany humans in their everyday tasks, condemned to lives of slavery. Mysteriously, increasing number of androids have been going deviant, or becoming sentient, gaining the ability to make their own choices and feel emotions. It's really quite fascinating. Now, I really don't play video games at all. My friends can attest to the fact that I can't do Minecraft for the life of me. But the intricate world the story created and the various directions in which the story could go were so intriguing to me. I spent hours watching playthroughs as though the game were a movie. Now, before I go on, just a quick disclaimer. I'm going to be talking about a game character in generalities without getting into too many specifics. But if you haven't yet played the game and you want to be super duper extra surprised, I suggest you tune out for a few minutes. Now back to our regularly scheduled TED Talk. As I was watching the game play out, I was particularly drawn to a handsome fellow with a few strange habits. Connor, an android himself, is an investigator and assassin programmed to hunt the deviants that claim to feel emotions. But as I watched Connor go through his missions, I noticed several peculiarities about him. He has nervous tics that an android really shouldn't have, such as playing with the coin he always carries around, his coat sleeves, or his tie. But it wasn't until Connor entered his mind palace, the virtual world literally inside his head, that I realized that Connor's story mirrors that of a person with anxiety and imposter syndrome. Connor is under constant supervision by a superior artificial intelligence named Amanda that resides within his headspace. She seems to provide some semblance of comfort for Connor, half-heartedly congratulating him when he performs up to par and checking in with him every so often about his missions. But even her congratulatory words are laced with the sinister poison of, "You could have done better." Amanda feeds off of and rewards self-deprecating comments. She scorns Connor whenever he expresses curiosity and questions why he has to do the things she is telling him to do. She persistently reminds him that he is nothing apart from a tool for his superiors, and that there will be chaos for the entire city if he doesn't complete his mission and obey his orders completely, without question, on top of the fact that he himself will be terminated. And I'm watching this thinking, a voice in your head that provides a false sense of security and validation while also constantly reminding you that you're nothing but the sum of your accomplishments and that you will die if you don't do everything it asks you to all the time without question. That sounds awfully familiar. It sounds an awful lot like the internal monologue that runs through my head when I'm panicking, because if I don't get a perfect score on this test, my teacher will be disappointed in me, my GPA will be cursed for the rest of the year, I won't get into a good college, and there will be chaos. Depending on how you choose to play Connor, he can adopt a variety of dispositions and make a multitude of decisions. But it ultimately comes down to whether or not he chooses to listen to the voice in his head. If he listens to the voice, obeying its every order, being Amanda's perfect little slave, he ends up being replaced and sent to his death. But if he chooses to be strong, defying the voice, doing what is right, despite how difficult that is for him, and navigating through the literal blizzard of doubts and feelings of inadequacy in his own mind, he ends up not only with his life, but also with a meaningful relationship. That's something I picked up on too. Having the capacity to choose this path for Connor essentially requires having a positive relationship with another individual who questions his machineness, and who just happens to be a very, in Connor's own words, hard-boiled police lieutenant named Hank Anderson. Just like a person struggling with a mental illness, Connor requires a support system to remind him that he is more than the voice in his head, that he is human and not just a machine built to be perfect all the time. Connor loses this relationship if he prioritizes his mission. That's what really sold it for me. In the most spectacular sci-fi way, Connor parallels a person with anxiety and imposter syndrome. He's similar to me in a lot of ways, and not just because we both look really good in a tie, although that is clearly also true. Ironically, Connor the android is far more human than any of the walking, talking mannequins in Mean Girls or Geek Charming. He has real flaws, real doubts, and he encounters real mental struggles that are solved by more than just meeting the popular kid at school. He is forced to look within himself to find the answers to his questions when all Amanda will tell him is, "Do what I'm telling you to do." He is forced to distinguish his voice from that of Amanda and recognize that one of them is speaking his own truth and the other is feeding him lies and insecurities about a completely unattainable perfection. What Watching Connor's story has helped me to put my everyday issues into perspective and examine not only the short-term consequences of not being perfect that my panic-ridden brain tends to focus on, but also the longer-term, more grave consequences of constantly expecting to be perfect. Connor is a self-projection. He's a cool and attractive character, and it's good fun for me to follow his storyline. But it has also helped me to realize that there are things we miss out on in life, like relationships with other people, when we pour all our focus into trying to be perfect. Throughout 10th and 11th grade, I didn't try to stop my panic spirals because I thought that worry would push me toward action, which would push me toward success. That was never the case. Recently, though, I've adopted a new outlook on panic attacks and intrusive thoughts, and now I've been working on stopping them using sensory exercises because I understand now that extreme perfection isn't sustainable. So maybe it's time we erase the assumption that immersing ourselves in fictional universes and projecting ourselves onto fictional characters is a simple form of escapism. Find a fictional being that reminds you of yourself, whether in positive or negative ways. If you haven't found them yet, keep looking. They're out there. I guarantee you that there is something you can illuminate about yourself, or about your relationships with others, or about your mental well-being, just through painless observation of said character. And I guarantee you that there is something you can improve about your life. Even disregarding the self-reformational benefits of engaging with fictional characters and universes, fiction breathes life into the mundane aspects of everyday tasks and brings us joy. Listening to movie soundtracks makes doing your chemistry homework feel like saving the world, or at least building the foundations of a world savior plan. It makes doing your laundry feel as though you're doing chores for the king of Agrabah. It makes walking through a city feel powerful, like you are not only fighting to survive a dystopian world, but thriving. Why not feel like this? Why suffer through your everyday tasks with dread rather than being both effective and content? In favor of not feeling silly? Who's judging you when you're alone inside your own headspace? That elated feeling that we get walking out of a movie theater, that feeling like we can do anything, like we are the main character and we are important, can be applied to any and all aspects of our lives. Now, I'm not saying that we should be selfish and perceive ourselves as the center of the universe, because that's simply not true. What I'm saying is that each of us matters, and that each of us has the opportunity to make a difference in the world in one way or another. Imagine what we could do if we did feel as vital as a movie character, as though what we did always affected others, because it does. We can lead with kindness and bravery. We can make sacrifices for others. We can inspire others. We are not so different from our favorite fictional characters after all. It's time to stop the stigma against loving fiction as an adult, and stop the assumption that as soon as we hit high school, our fantastical dreams are supposed to start fading away. Engaging with fiction could be the key to a life filled with innovation, satisfaction, vigor for everyday occurrences, a healthy cycle of self-improvement, and good mental health. You can have your happy ending without completely waking up from your wildest dreams. So maybe it's time that we hold on to our dreams and hit snooze for just a little while longer, if only to remind ourselves that we are the magical, powerful beings of our own stories. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we have Alvira Tyagi. She is in 12th grade, and her speech is titled "The New Kids in Town."
Generation Z. Our first members were born in 1996. We lived during the re-election of Bill Clinton, the introduction of Pokemon, and the growth of eBay. Since then, Gen Z has experienced even more: the good, the bad, and the in-between. I myself am a devoted member of this generation, like many of you watching. At 17 years old, I spend my time doing what most teenagers do: scrolling through my social media networks, sending my friends amusing memes, and browsing trending news stories. A few months ago, I was munching on some delicious avocado toast and slurping down a vanilla latte when I came across an interesting article on my phone: Why the Z in Gen Z means zombie. I nearly choked on a chunk of avocado. After many hours of online research, I had found dozens of blogs hammering and disparaging Gen Z to the core. It appeared that internet users everywhere had allied together to bully this generation, my generation. It became clear that we needed some backup, and that someone from Gen Z was going to have to do it. So here I am, standing in front of you all, hoping to impart some sense of why I believe that Generation Z deserves some credit, but also how we must continue to be empowered to create reform in our society in the years to come. With a wealth of experience at a young age, access to powerful technological tools, and a competitive desire to be seen and heard, Gen Z is poised to have a lasting and impactful experience on the world. Our generation is the first to come of age with the understanding that climate and ecological breakdown is not a dystopian movie premise, but a real, burning possibility. But what truly is Gen Z? Who are we? What do we stand for? What is our role in the context of all of the generations that have preceded us? These are questions I've had time to reflect on in the past few months, particularly as I've determined which college I plan to attend and am embarking on my next steps into adulthood next month. Even when equipped with years of more life experience than Gen Z, older generations have doubted our participation in societal matters. What wars have they fought and died in, is one popular question. In fact, the answer is several, including conflicts in Iran, Iraq, and Syria. But it's important to note that waging endless war is not the only way we can fight in this generation. Developing a wide breadth of knowledge and developing powerful organizational tools is a way we've found to be much more effective. Generation Z has proved that we are not lazy or apathetic through the various teen-driven coalitions that have developed over the past few years. Take the Sunrise Movement, for example. A grassroots organization established in 2017, this teen-driven coalition has led climate strikes across the world, but has also fiercely lobbied congressional and political leaders to take drastic action. Greta Thunberg, an 18-year-old environmental activist, took a 13-day cross-Atlantic voyage to decrease her carbon footprint as she traveled to the United Nations Climate Action Summit 2 years ago. She has faced relentless attacks from former President Donald Trump on the weekly, yet she still continues her school strikes in the midst of a raging pandemic. And let's not forget the ever-expanding March for Our Lives movement. Just days after horrifying gun violence erupted at their school, Parkland students unfurled a campaign dedicated to ensuring that this would never happen again. Adults had failed them, and 17 of their peers had ended up dead. This nation's youth is under fire. We refuse to accept that daily gun violence is just the reality of life in America. Older generations need to absorb this rage and ally with us. My fellow members of Gen Z acknowledge that our lives will unfold in a state of emergency without direct reform. It's time to hear us, it's time to be with us, and it's time to view the world from our lens. And it's also so important to recognize how crucial it is that Gen Z has been surrendering our adolescences towards correcting this country's cruel course, which was created or otherwise enabled by the neglect of previous generations. These so-called zombies are who I'd consider to be bold and unflinching heroes. 90 million Americans now belong to Generation Z. Though most of our population was not of age in 2016, we voted in large numbers this past year, and we will continue to do so as we gradually enter our voting ages. It's time to see us, it's time to be with us. Enough is enough. And while we see news stories about the world apparently crumbling around us every single day, it's Generation Z that's been handed this complex task of reshaping these complex societal structures. Yet, in the midst of it all, I sense hope. I sense a glimmer of passion. I sense the thirst for change, activism, and growth. Enough is enough. It's time for Gen Z to wake up and leave this world a better place than it was when we first entered it. So I will continue enjoying my extravagant avocado toast feasts along with my vanilla latte on the side. I will continue to peruse Instagram and Snapchat guilt-free. And I will continue to steadfastly support my peers. I'm with Gen Z, and you should be too. The new kids are in town, and we're not going anywhere anytime soon. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this virtual event tonight. Though circumstances didn't allow for a fully live event, we're grateful to share these speeches with you in this way. And now we'd like to thank everyone who's made this event possible, beginning with our club advisor, Mrs. Wade, for her constant support and guidance that she shared with us throughout this process.
And next, we'd like to thank all of our club officers, Lauren Zhu, Viraj Parihar, Ashley Sheffaway, Jethro Lee, Hannah Yu, Hannah Lee, Roshan Mehta, Sarov Bhavdekar, Yuktha Milukuri, TJ Wubshet, and Darren Dwan for all of their dedication and hard work.
And thank you to Jake DeVoe, Ben Miller, Peter Mostert, Kendall Schilling, Sarah Hamilton, and Lydia Smith for the recording, the light work, and the sound work for this event.
And lastly, we'd like to thank Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Gorman, and Mrs. Keogh for helping us with other parts of the event.
Thank you again for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed all the ideas, thoughts that the speakers shared with us tonight. And again, if you didn't know, all of these speeches will be available on the TEDx YouTube channel. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your school year. Thank you.
Thank you.